This is Notes on Quotes. I'm Stephen Harrison. And the premise of the show is I'm simply talking to really interesting people about a quotation that's meaningful to them. People like my guest, Krys Boyd. Krys is the host and managing editor of the NPR show Think with Krys Boyd. And on our interview show, Krys Boyd has had distinguished guests such as the actor Bryan Cranston from the show Breaking Bad, the late public radio host Diane Rehm, the author and a hero of mine, Malcolm Gladwell, and former Secretary of State Madeline Albright. And just to explain a little bit about Krys Boyd's radio show, she has a huge following, and part of the reason for that is Krys Boyd does not focus on the superficial or the glib topics. Like, she doesn't focus on who are you dating or celebrity gossip. When she has a guest on the show, what Krys Boyd does is she focuses on having more of an in-depth or a thought-provoking conversation about ideas. And I think that a lot of people really like the sincerity and kind of the fact that it's not a superficial conversation. That's one of the reasons that Krys Boyd's show is so popular, Think. And if you can hear, if it's getting across to you that I am a big fan of Krys Boyd, that you should know that actually I've been a fan of Krys Boyd since high school, because I grew up here in Dallas. And I remember when I got my license, I was driving through town and I thought I was listening to NPR and Krys Boyd's show was on. And I was just thinking, wow, this is so much smarter than just about everything that's on the radio, right? This is a very smart, very excellent NPR radio show. And I loved it just right from the beginning. I like to pick up a quote about each of our guests. And my quote about Krys Boyd comes from the journalist Jim Rogers, who wrote for D Magazine. And he said that Krys Boyd, quote, politely dominates Texas public radio. And I love that juxtaposition there in the quote. Krys Boyd, she does politely dominate because she's confident, she's calm, but she also just has this genuine respect for ideas that I think is sort of so important in our political climate, especially. Now, I have to say that this episode with Krys Boyd is one of the ones that I've thought about the most since recording it. And I think there are a couple reasons for that. One, I'm quote unquote interviewing the interviewer, because Krys Boyd is normally the one that's asking questions of her guests on the show. It was a bit of a flip for me to ask all these questions of her. And I think that kind of gives sort of this meta quality to this particular episode. Secondly, Krys Boyd and her team were kind enough to really invite me into the KERA studios to record the episode. And it was so great to meet Krys Boyd in person. Like, she's a childhood hero of mine. And here we are face to face. But I do think you might notice that my voice is a little bit hesitant. Maybe there's a little bit of nerves or fanboying in my voice in this episode. And I think that's why. That's what happens when you meet someone who you've admired and been a fan of since high school. And also, I think that this quote that Krys Boyd selects to talk about, and I do think she picked just an excellent quote to talk about and had a really good explanation for it. But one of the things Krys Boyd got across to me is this idea that there is value in persevering with a project over the long term. I think our culture really tries to encourage us to drop projects really quickly, but she makes sort of the opposite point with this quote, and that's the value of sticking with it. Hey, before we get started, please subscribe to the Notes on Quotes podcast, and please leave us a review. You can follow the show's Instagram @Notes on Quotes, and you can follow me, Stephen Harrison, on Twitter and other social media channels. If you're interested, you can read some of my writing in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Slate. And don't forget, you can read the print versions of all of these interviews at notesonquotes.com. And with that, enjoy the show. Krys, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephen.
And I should mention that we're recording the episode here at the Think Studios in KERA in Dallas. Thanks so much to you and to the KERA team for hosting this.
It's our pleasure.
Krys, what quote are we chatting about today?
So there's a quote by Calvin Coolidge, President of the United States, and it's about persistence. And it says, "Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent." I love that quote.
Oh, I do too. I really like that one. And as you mentioned, the quote comes from Calvin Coolidge. He was the 30th president of the United States. For our listeners, Calvin Coolidge took the presidency upon the sudden death of Warren G. Harding, and he served as president from 1923 to 1929. And as president, Calvin Coolidge's nickname was Silent Cal, a nickname he earned because he was a man of few words and because he had a reputation for being a man of action. Krys, I'm always curious, out of all the many quotes you could have picked, and I see that you've actually got the quote on a plaque right there, out of all the quotes you could have on a plaque, why did you pick that one?
Well, it's not so much because I admire President Coolidge. I don't think he's high on the list of the very best presidents. But I like the idea of this idea that work is really ultimately as important or more important than any of the other assets you bring with you, including talent and including potential. I think sometimes we get obsessed in our society with people who have this kind of party trick, magic ability to be good at something without working hard at it. And it was something that really impressed me, especially when I was younger, this idea that some people are just naturally gifted at things. The older I've gotten, the more I feel like talent kind of gets you in the door, and maybe a natural ability to do something better than other people can naturally do it puts you in the right place, but then you actually have to start learning your craft or your art or your science by putting in the work and actually doing it. You get good at something, you get amazing at something by doing it over and over and refining and practicing, and there's really no substitute for that. And so I think ultimately I believe that success is really tied into your willingness to put in the work.
Krys, your quote reminded me a little bit of this Winston Churchill quote that I also like, that goes something like, never, never, never give up. Do you think that people sometimes have a tendency to give up too easily?
It's really easy to, when something gets hard or when you think you might fail at something, to say, I didn't want that after all, and to pick something else. And I think a lot of people who have the potential to be very successful give up too soon because they are so afraid of looking like a fool. I mean, you're going to stumble, you're going to fall, you're going to fail ultimately on your road to whatever it is you want to do well. Certainly, I mean, there is an argument to be made sometimes for cutting your losses and recognizing that you've made the wrong choice. You know, I know people who went to school for 4 years or 6 years or 8 years and then discovered they don't want to be an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor and have had to kind of make a different choice. But I think giving up too soon because we're trying to sort of save face is definitely a hazard.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that might be, as you said, the more prevalent problem that sometimes people have. I wanted to do kind of a close reading of the quote. Coolidge mentions several other qualities, as you said, talent, genius, education, and he says those are ultimately less important than persistence. And I like the wording he uses here. It's a very bold statement, though. He says persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. Do you agree that persistence can be omnipotent?
To a degree, yes. I think those who refuse to give up, which doesn't necessarily mean only doing the same thing over and over. Sometimes persistence is about finding another way around the mountain, right? If you can't get over it the traditional way, maybe you find a way to jog around it or tunnel underneath it. And I do think that, you know, privilege plays a role in our ability to persist sometimes. There are people who just have so many obstacles placed in their way that it's really hard to keep going at things. But I do think I have known a lot of people who just really couldn't allow themselves to quit doing something, and so they finish it out. And if you think about challenges in our life, you know, so often we think about challenges as related to our careers, right, or our art or the thing that we want to do. But, you know, most people stick out a challenge like parenting. Many people stick out, you know, romantic relationships, which is not to say that they're not rewarding and amazing, but we are able to keep doing things as long as we tell ourselves that there's just no other option.
Would you mind rereading the quote again for our listeners?
Sure. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. That's Calvin Coolidge.
Krys, you've had a number of roles in your career. I read at one point you were working in El Paso as a local TV reporter and reading traffic reports on the morning radio show. Also that you were working at one point 2 jobs at the same time, up to 70 hours per week. And in addition to that, you're a mother and a wife, and you have a family. Can you talk a little bit about the ups and downs in your personal and professional career and how this idea of persistence has played a role?
Well, Early in my career, when I started as a reporter at a local TV station, I just didn't make enough money to support myself. In fact, I had made more money working at a now I think closed down department store called Foley's in college, selling petite twin sets to little old ladies that I made at my first journalism job. So I needed a second journalism job, which was this morning drive radio job. So I would work sometimes, depending on the shift that I got at the TV station, I would work about 5 a.m. to 9 at the radio station, and then go home for a little bit, and then sometimes work 1:30 to 10:30 at the news station, and then turn around and do it all over again. Sometimes it was 7-day weeks, depending on where my weekends fell. I learned to work really hard early in my career, and I've always been grateful for that. I wasn't so grateful at the time when I was, falling asleep whenever I wasn't actually working. But ever since then, nothing seems quite as kind of physically challenging. You had to be in top form and ready to go and kind of bring it for many, many hours a week. So I'm very glad that economics required me to work really hard. And then later on, combining, parenting with work is hard in any circumstance. I think any people who have mothers and fathers alike who have been raising children while working a career, it's hard. There's the constant sense that you're not giving anything 100%, and everything needs 100% that is important to you in your life. I had some challenges when my children were very young. My first husband died very suddenly, and I was left with a 10-month-old and a 3-year-old, and looking to kind of rebuild my career after taking a little time off when I was newly home with my daughter. It was a really, really challenging time. And the thing about that time is that it wasn't a choice. Like, I had 2 kids to support, and so I just needed to do what it took. And so initially I sort of cobbled together some part-time work and some contract work before I was able to get back into a full-time position here at KERA, which is the station that now produces the radio show and the podcast that I do. I was very fortunate that I had made really good connections, but it was challenging. But having gone through that, I think I realized that you can suffer the worst thing that you think is going to happen to you and find the other side of it. It's not visible in the moment. It's like walking through a tunnel where you don't see the light at the end until it's there, and then you've found your way through.
Yeah, and sort of you find maybe in that circumstance, the circumstance you just described, a persistence or a trait of persistence that you didn't even know that you had, maybe.
Absolutely. And like, it does sort of take away fear in a way when you have experienced something that before it happened you would have imagined was the worst thing that could ever happen. You realize there's very little that you are in control of in some ways. Like you just have to shed the illusion that you can, by following all the rules, that you can make the world work the way you want it to work. You also know that you can survive what you think will just destroy you, that it won't destroy you. And I think it gives you a little bit of, you become intrepid after that, because you realize that you can probably get through really hard times. And there's also the sense that, by persisting, you gain this kind of layer of strength. There's a thing called post-traumatic growth, which basically means, when something terrible has happened, after it's all over, after it seems impossible and every day is really just horrendous, and I wouldn't recommend it exactly, after that, you're changed. You're left a different person, maybe with more confidence in your ability. The whole thing about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, it's a saying because it's true.
Yeah, and you mentioned that when you were first started working, you were actually working at Foley's department store while working on your radio jobs in order to support. That kind of reminds me of the journalists nowadays who take a second job at Uber or something like that to support their craft. But now you host the Think radio show on KERA, and I was reading that can be up to 9 hour-long episodes each week, and that sometimes to prepare for an episode, you have to read 2 nonfiction books in a night, or up to 200 nonfiction fiction books in a year, and that it's just a lot of preparation involved in every interview. So I can see how persistence would be really important in your line of work. But I was wondering, just on a personal note, is burnout ever a concern for you?
I guess it's a concern because I don't want to burn out. I'm really lucky that I truly love my job. And, my kids who are teenagers and a couple of my daughter's still in high school, and she'll say, why do you want to do this homework all the time? And the answer is sometimes I don't want to. Sometimes, like everybody else, I would love to come home and spend a long time cooking dinner and watch a dumb TV show, as soon as dinner's over or whatever. And that's not really an option for me. But I try to, bring my sense of curiosity into the preparation, which is definitely the vast majority. The time spent on the air in front of the microphone that's 9 hours a week, as you pointed out. The rest of the time is reading and researching and writing. The thing is, that's the price of the amazing, fun thing that I get to do when I'm interviewing someone. So to go into it unprepared is so terrifying that I guess I don't burn out on the preparation because I know that it's just what you must do. Once I stop doing that, once I start phoning it in, then, the idea that you can do something really well, you have to recognize that you're not going to do it well if you're not prepared.
I'm visualizing it sort of like an iceberg where there's the hour of radio time and then several hours of preparation time underneath that.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
I'd like to shift course and talk about the quote kind of in the context of society more generally. At Slate, we regularly write about technology, and there's this popular idea among technology companies right now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, called fail faster. Yeah. Meaning that if an idea doesn't work, you should just drop it and kind of move very quickly on to the next one. But I kind of get the sense that Calvin Coolidge might take issue with this fail faster idea, and that he might say that there's a real value in sticking with a project over the long term. What do you think is the value of persistence, maybe specifically in these sort of fail faster times?
I think fail faster is based on the idea that there will always be 58,000 good additional ideas in the pipeline, and that there's, it feels like there's so much information and so many things coming to challenge us that if we aren't moving very quickly, we must be getting old and stale. And I think there is still a value, even in this world where we're all consuming so much information. I mean, you and I are journalists, but lots of people are now consuming news and information like journalists. They've become news junkies, even though they have jobs as, bakers and chemistry teachers and nurses and all kinds of other things, but they feel like they have to keep up all the time. And I think fail faster is this idea that we all have to keep up and that someone else is coming along with something that's going to compete with whatever it is we do that might be better. And so we have to just get out of the way and move along. There's good reason to know when something has outlived its usefulness. But I also think many things take time to develop. I mean, the show that I do today is very much a show about ideas and about trying to find what is new or challenging or surprising in an idea that we think we already understand. It took me a while. It took me, hundreds of interviews before I recognized that that was what I really wanted to do. I wouldn't say that the show was a failure, but if someone had said, well, just this standard interview show that's based on the same things that everybody else is talking about, it's not right. It could have gone away 10 years ago, but I wouldn't have had a chance to kind of blossom into what it is. And I think sometimes if you fail too fast and too often and abandon what you're doing, you can miss out on a growth opportunity. Failing doesn't necessarily require, balling up the piece of paper and throwing it away. Sometimes it can mean flipping it over on the other side and taking the outline from what you've already done and reformulating your ideas.
Can you talk a little bit about how the show has changed over the years? It sounded like you were saying that part of it was just kind of figuring out the identity of the show over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think a radio show or a podcast, it has to have a voice. It has to have a voice. And the voice can change over time to suit what's happening in the world or changes in the team that is making it. But there has to be a sense when you tune into something that there's like a personality behind it. And I don't mean, like, my show is not full of my big personality. I don't really have a big personality, but I think people know when they tune in that it's going to be about a respect for ideas, diverse ideas that may or may not reflect what I think about the world, and kind of a respect for humanity. I think that was always there. But the idea that to make it interesting, you need to make sure that you're taking something that we think we already understand and turning it inside out just for the sheer joy of engaging with those ideas. That took a while.
And actually, just this week, you had a geneticist on the show. I really enjoyed that episode. He was so passionate about the work that he was working on. And it made me think of this question, and that's that there's a body of scientific literature that's out right now that kind of suggests that a lot of our human traits are determined in part by our environment or genetics or some combination. I was wondering, what's your take on that for persistence? How is that trait, how that might be developed or grown by a person?
Well, I think it's really helpful to be exposed to challenges when you're a kid. I want to be really careful and say I don't mean challenges like poverty. I don't mean trauma. Hopefully, we will get to a place in our society where we can prevent that for most or all children, not just in this country, but on the planet. But I do think a good old-fashioned losing a race in PE and sometimes, losing a spelling bee in class and trying and failing something in school, I think it's really important. I even think the way that giving children an opportunity for unstructured play is really important. I think our environments give us an opportunity to try things and not get them right and then try them a different way or keep practicing them until we get them right. But our instinct sometimes is to shield especially young people from all of these hardships. And so they don't, if you're not careful, you can emerge into the adult world without any calluses on you. And that just means that your first years of adulthood are going to be really, really painful. So I think our environments and the challenges we give ourselves and our children are a really good opportunity to learn how to be persistent. I think, it's helpful if we don't always know for sure that someone will come to our rescue if things don't go our way. And I think it's helpful to, even in your first professional jobs, it's really helpful to be in an environment where you're not necessarily the star or the boss, where I very much believe in kind of working your way up through whatever profession you want to do, because it's good to know a little something about all the other people around you that will ultimately support the work that you do.
And I think that's hard, right? Because the adults or maybe the people who are older than you who try to shield someone from difficult circumstances, they might have good intentions, right? And they're, but that, as you said, can have negative consequences down the line if someone hasn't developed that persistent quality.
Right. And as an adult, as a parent, if you have the power to stop suffering in your child, even mild suffering, you want to do that. And I think we need to sort of be persistent in letting kids feel a little bit of pain from, challenging circumstances.
A few of the other guests on the podcast have said that a portion of their success is attributable to their hard work and dedication, and then another part is sort of simply being in the right place at the right time. I was kind of wondering what were your personal thoughts on this idea of the mix of the value of persistence and serendipity in your life?
Oh, I think serendipity is a huge percentage of it. I think everybody needs to recognize when they've had good fortune and then be ready to apply hard work. But listen, I was born into middle-class white privilege. I was basically given a college education. I mean, I had a scholarship and parents who worked to put me there, but I didn't work that hard to be in a place where I was able to complete an education. I have been in a lot of places where people were very kind to me and interested in nurturing young talent when I was young. Sometimes things have happened sort of out of the blue that have just worked for me. Someone left a job at just the moment that I was ready to step into a particular position and was able to apply. I always want to be well aware of the role of luck in my life, because the truth is, I think there are a lot of people who haven't been as materially successful or as successful as it might look from a distance, who don't work any less hard than I do. So yes, I'm really glad you brought this up, because I want to be clear that I don't think because I've worked harder than everybody else, I've been able to do something that I love. I've been very, very lucky.
But as you said, there's a bit of hard work that's sort of necessary for everyone. And as you said, sort of the serendipity kind of element. They're kind of working together,
Right.
I think.
I mean, you can blow serendipity by
Right.
not working hard, by being lazy, by being entitled. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Krys, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed chatting about this quote and the conversation.
It's great talking with you. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Notes on Quotes. Again, I'm Stephen Harrison, and this series is a team effort with audio production done by Jason Cady, transcriptions provided by Sarah Baum of Sharp Copy Transcription. Our theme song is Water and Bridges by Joshua Heffernan, and the podcast cover art was created by the talented Kathy Weller. Check out our website, notesonquotes.com, for the archive of all previous episodes and the print versions of all prior interviews. Sign up to get the notes delivered to your inbox and help support the series. Follow us on Instagram, Medium, and social media at Notes on Quotes. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast on whatever platform you choose. Thanks again.